stream. Hello, over here. Perfect. Hi, welcome back. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to update the title of the stream. Let me do that when you all start, Aaron. All right, we are on day 6 of our IEEE Summer School on Computational Intelligence Development for Games. I don't remember if that's exactly the wording, but it's a lot of words and it's close enough. Um, we have Aaron from Brace Yourself Games here, talking about game design frameworks. And there'll be another lecture after the lunch, and then maybe we'll do a roundtable on monetization. Maybe we'll talk about Magic the Gathering in design. Maybe we'll talk about something else. I'll wing it at that point. That'll be later. Don't worry about it until now. With that, though, I'll just pass it right over.
Sweet. How's it going? Thanks and the faculty for inviting me. This is great. It's like just awesome. I'm always down to talk game design. We'll go through a whole bunch of stuff here, but interrupt me at any point if you've got questions, and we've got time for questions afterwards and in between as well. If there's a term that I throw out that I'm like, it's the quadratic formula mathematical sine wave, and you're like, I don't know what that means. So let me know. We'll jam on it. And yeah, without further ado, this is Game Design Frameworks. My name's Aaron Gordon. My pronouns are he and him. I'm currently working as a design director at Brace Yourself Games. Just so you know a little about me, my background. I've been making games for a while. I started out in the UK working at Frontier. I helped make Elite Dangerous, working on the design team. Connect Sport Rivals, I'm sure you've all played it. Just world-renowned Connect Sports game. It took me years to find a physical disc for it for my collection. Uh, cool. I take no responsibility for the wacky waving, flailing like mishaps that may or may not happen. But it was a lot of fun. I then decided, in my 20s, I'm like, hey, I should go traveling. I should do a thing. Canada seems pretty cool. I should go there. Oh, where should I go? Vancouver or Toronto? Vancouver's too far away. Toronto is closer. I decided to come here in February in Toronto. Bad idea. Don't do that from a very mild country into like an ice storm. But survived, got a job at Ubisoft Toronto, worked as a designer on Starlink Battle for Atlas, had some Star Fox Nintendo stuff in there. It was pretty cool, epic space game, open world stuff. Then worked on Far Cry 6 as a designer and decided, Ubisoft's awesome, it was great, wanted to try something new and came over to here working for Brace Yourself Games. And here, while I've been at Brace Yourself Games as the design director, this is my job to establish quality and design in everything they do. So it's not my job to call the shots. It's just my job to make sure that all the teams are having thorough processes and they're using design frameworks effectively. And if I go, why do you want to do this thing? And they go, because this, because this, because this. I'm like, rad, that sounds awesome. Go do that. And then helping teams out where they need support. While I've been there, we shipped Industries of Titan, we shipped Phantom Brigade, we're still supporting Phantom Brigade and got some exciting updates as well. And we're currently working on Rift of the Necrodancer, spiritual successor to Crypt. It's more of a rhythm-based game like Guitar Hero. That's a lot of fun. Okay, enough about me. That's just my background. I've always been in design. So yeah, I'll here to talk to you about design. Mostly I'm going to go over game pillars and gameplay loops, what they are, how I've used them in the past, how you can use them to help you out in your game when you get stuck as well, and kind of some easy pitfalls as well that I've definitely fallen into that hopefully you don't make the same mistakes that I have. So game pillars, what are they? Why do we use them? Game pillars are super valuable for ensuring alignment across the team. They're super important for supporting your team culture and the kind of experience that you're trying to make. They're really useful razors. So if you're thinking like, well, why would we do this versus this? You can go back to your pillars and say, okay, what should we support first? We need to support these things. We can then cut stuff out of the game. We can then simplify stuff to just support what's important. And then it leads to the features. So I found it really effective to not start off with a feature to be like, we need a jetpack, we need asteroids, we need this. You start off with like, what do we need? What's the pillar of the game? Okay, a pillar of our game is um, zero gravity, free exploration in space. Okay, that means these kinds of features will probably need to support that pillar. Otherwise, you can get stuck in a loop of like just creating a bunch of features that don't really tie into a cohesive whole. So here's a process I've used for generating pillars before in the past. It's always a very collaborative exercise. It's not something that you, as a designer or as a leader of a team, go to the team and say, "We're doing this." It's got to come from the whole team, especially if you're working like in a small group. Everybody's got to be invested, and everybody has something that I'll talk about a lot. Is that everybody on your team is a designer? It's not just the person who's doing design. It's like, well, that's the designer, they're doing it. If you're an engineer, you're a designer. If you're an artist, you're a designer. Everybody has good design ideas, and it makes the game better for getting everybody's thoughts, hopes, and dreams. So first of all, do that. You've obviously got lots of ideas about what kind of game you want to make. Just spitball, do the classic no wrong ideas kind of jam. We did this with a game that unfortunately didn't ship, but we did this for like a underwater survival game, and we're saying, okay, we want there to be like gear, it needs to be important, progression needs to be important, combat's important, what's exciting us, what's puzzling us, what do we mean? We say like quality, yeah, we want to make a quality game. What do we actually mean? We wouldn't set out to make a not a bad quality game. It doesn't make any sense. So what does quality mean for us? That leads to, you start refining it. I found it pretty effective to put things into buckets. So you establish a pillar for your mood of your game, the world, and the experience. What we did is we took all of these kind of thoughts and feelings and refined them down to like, okay, our game is inherently multiplayer. Our game is about something about awe-inspiring, caring about the player, something about being a scientist and explorer, and something about, we want it to be difficult, but we don't want it to be, hitting your head against the wall difficult. We want it to feel fair. So the next stage is wordsmithing these pillars. It sounds cheesy, but you really got to spend a lot of time making them sound pithy and making them sound something like you can put on a t-shirt. And like it's just there for the game. In Far Cry, we had what was the pillar? Oh, Guerrilla Fantasy. For Far Cry 6, it's based off of like it's inspired by Cuba. It's called Yara, and as a main character, you're part of it's like a rebellion, a freedom fighting force. And one of the pillars was that liberation fantasy, like guerrilla fantasy. So everything that we were working on, we would bring it back to like, okay, how can we support a guerrilla fantasy for this mission, for this layout, for this art asset? And it was really useful for the team to have that pithy, like it's guerrilla fantasy. It's not like it's like being this and this. It's like short, concise, easy to digest. And then here's some examples of what we came up with. Yeah, this was our not so secret project. This actually, I was working for Phoenix Labs for a little bit, and they unfortunately cancelled this project, but they've been pretty cool about it. And recently they've just said, hey, yeah, you can talk about the project as much as you want and share a bunch of artwork. So we're working on Survival Crafter, think Subnautica, multiplayer. That gets you half the way there. And some like ProcGen involved. It was more about multi-dimensional stuff than it was about exploring a set space. And it was all about like putting your finger on the scale of you had some kind of device that would generate like dimensional rift, and it was about like, oh, what kind of things do you want to generate in the world? Let's give you the power. Let's give the player the power to generate their own worlds, and not just have them at the whim of whatever seed you established at the beginning. So from that, we established something for mood, and we established multi-dimensional pioneers. A really good exercise I found when you're doing game pillars is to think about the exact opposite of your pillar. And is the exact opposite good for a different game? Otherwise, you can get into a situation where your pillars are, you know, bombastic gameplay, high quality UI, UX. And I've worked on teams like that, and I've done that myself. And it doesn't really help you because you'll be there working and you're like, well, I'm not going to make a bad UI. And that doesn't help you. Like if you say engaging combat, it's like, well, am I going to go make not engaging combat? These are kind of table stakes if you want to go there. So an exercise we did was do the is the opposite still good? So what these pillars meant is it meant we are adapting to perilous challenges with high-tech solutions. We're not um, a game where the player is in their element, they've trained for this specific situation. That's a bunch of games, and that works really well if for a bunch of those titles, but we're not that. We were a game where experimentation led to the joy of discovery. We're not a game where the path to success is always clear, which a bunch of games are. I won't go through all these, but just to give you an example like of some more, We had collaborate and thrive as one of our multiplayer pillars. Again, just having multiplayer as a pillar doesn't really, it's more of a feature. It's more of a thing that we just want to accomplish. This is how do we want our multiplayer to function? You'll often see online too, if you search for game pillars or look at them for other games, you'll see people trying to extrapolate out and say like, oh, the pillars for this game were combat, exploration, and survival. And it's like, well, those are things you can do in the game and they're very important, but it doesn't speak to, yeah, if I was on the dev team, I don't think those would have been the pillars. I think that would have just been the thing we're doing. And then what does survival mean for us? What does exploration mean for us? So we had that. We had for our worlds sublime underwater worlds. So it spoke to the location. It spoke to what we wanted to achieve. So it wasn't about dark, gritty, scary underwater worlds. It was about sublime underwater worlds, big bright lights. Not jump scares. And in terms of the experience, it's always good to have one that gets to your game experience. We had intuitive endeavors, so it should be hard. It's a survival game. Survival crafting genre is normally pretty tough, and players that come to that genre are like they expect to die a whole bunch and reset. But we wanted everything to be intuitive. We didn't want it to be that they could wing their way through the game, reloading old save games. Some games do that. That's great and that's awesome. That just wasn't us. So we use those pillars to help like design pretty much everything in the game, and not just for the designers. All of the engineers, all the artists we would say these pillars to each other every day. Every time we're going through a milestone, we'd be like, cool, how does that support intuitive endeavors? Like, okay, I can make it more intuitive by doing, I can make it more of an endeavor. Like, is it too easy? Is it an endeavor? It doesn't feel like I've achieved the thing. Okay, I can make it more of an endeavor this way. And pillars work really well if every single person in the team goes back to their desk and they have them in their brains and they're always thinking, okay, how can I have a decision to make in my implementation. I can either make this timer for oxygen last 10 seconds or 30 seconds. Well, 10 seconds wouldn't be very intuitive, but I can't make it last for 10 minutes because that's not really challenging. Okay, it's got to kind of be about this. And it just helps streamline everything, give that decision-making power to everybody on the team. And again, champion like everybody to be a designer on the team, not just like, well, I'll implement it exactly how the spec says. It's like, no, everybody's part of creating this experience. Where do they fit? So I would always do pillars, pretty early on in a project. And it's very tempting to jump straight in and do the fun stuff and start prototyping and start like getting it together and just start working on the game. Because at the beginning of a project too, it's always very exciting and you always want to just like get going. I would really encourage everybody to take some time, think about what's important to your game, think about the pillars. Like you start off with a game pitch or a product mandate if you've got somebody else working with you, if you've got a publisher, or if you're just being given a spec. You can use that time to kind of have fun and go fast. You can just go prototype, throw things against the wall, see what sticks. And then after you've kind of got a vague vibe of like, okay, I think we want to go in this direction. Here's what plays to our skill sets as a team. Here's what we can achieve within the time limit. Okay, great. Let's establish what our pillars are. Then from the pillars, you can then define what your design goals are. So out of your pillars, go, okay, how are we going to achieve that pillar? Um, and you can also use your design goals to specify, here's what we've hoped to achieve this milestone. Here's what we're going to achieve this build. Here's how it supports the pillars. You can then do something we've called user stories, which I can talk about later as well. User stories are really powerful because you might think jetpack's done. I implemented the jetpack, no problem. Everybody on your team probably has a different understanding of how that jetpack's supposed to work. And you'll get it into the hands of everybody and be like, oh, I thought I was going to go up into the stratosphere with this. And you're like, no, I thought it was just going to be you hover off the ground a meter. And so it's really important to establish your user stories. And I've always structured them as a player, I want to do X so that I can achieve Y. So for a jetpack, it's like, I want to fly around on a jetpack so that I can get to where I'm going fast. That tells me, oh, okay, this feature isn't about friction. It's not about making it so, okay, there's a fuel meter and I got to balance this and I got to have air resistance. It's about having fun and it's about just beelining it there. Also, the opposite is very valid of like, I want to be able to, um, I want a jetpack so that I can carefully manage my fuel reserves and make a deliberate choice of when to use my fuel um, for travel or when to use it for life support. That's now a very tactile survival. It's a very tense moment of like short, sharp bursts of a jetpack just to get where you're going. It's a risky maneuver. So there's two completely different ways you can implement a feature. And if you all agree on the team, like these are the user stories we want to be true, it then means that when you're going over to your desk and implementing this feature, you can just tell like, is this done? I don't know if it's done. Okay, let me go back to the user story. I want to be able to do this so that I can, so it feels like this. Oh, yeah, okay, it feels like that now. Yeah, okay, cool, it's done. Great. And it stops you from, we've all been there, you spend days and days and weeks fine tuning a certain feature. You don't feel like it's done yet. You feel like there's something missing. These help you just put it down. And then from a user story, you can start generating tasks from that. So if you want the jetpack to do a certain thing, you want it just to beeline in a certain direction, you're then like, cool, what tasks do we need for that? Okay, the presentation of the jetpack's not that important. It's not part of the goal. It can just be a box for now. It doesn't matter what it looks like to achieve our user story. How does it need to function? Well, we don't need to kind of track fuel or have anything like that for now. If ever, to achieve our user story, it's just click and it happens. So it really helps you streamline what you're actually going to do, what you're going to put in the game. How you can use pillars too, in if you're creating design documentation or specs. I found it really useful to line up all of your features, and then like when you're doing a pitch to the rest of your team or you're defining like a feature, you can then say, here's how it supports the pillars. The jetpack supports pillar one in this way really strongly. It supports our exciting exploration, whatever your pillar is. It doesn't really support the next pillar, but that's okay for these reasons. Pillar three, okay, yeah, fundamentally doesn't support this pillar. Maybe that's okay. I'd probably advise you to go back and see, look for opportunities where it can support that as well. And again, just doing this exercise first before you like nail down these features and really get attached to them helps make sure your game is really cohesive and everything fits into each other. Again, I've certainly done it. I'm sure you've experienced it. We go away and make games. It's like, oh, it just feels like a bit separate and nothing's really connecting. And this helps you make sure that that does happen. And again, you will play test and you'll figure it out, but this helps you in the early stages to kind of set your trajectory to something that's, it's going to fit together a little bit better. Some best practices, like I mentioned, they got to be useful for every discipline. They can't just be like, oh, and I'm an artist, so it doesn't matter to me what the game pillars are. If that's the response you're getting from the team, you need to go to the artist, be like, cool, work with me then. What would be helpful to you? It's like, oh, well, it'd be helpful to me if I just knew how big the things needed to be or how, the style of it. Okay, cool, let's work that into the pillars as well. Same with engineering, same for animation, everything. Every person in the team has to find these things useful. Otherwise, you need to go work on your pillars some more. Um, yeah, these were ours: intuitive endeavors, collaborate and thrive, sublime underworld world, multi-dimensional pioneers. And we spent a long time just going to everybody on the team, making sure that that helped everyone. It helped our network programmer because he knows that, okay, collaborate and thrive. So we need to make sure that people like can get into games easily and then they stay there for long lengths of time. It's not something that's, drop in, drop out multiplayer. It's like we're locked into this experience together. They need to be super specific. They can't be too broad. Like I say, you can't just have combat. It's like, I don't know what to do with that. If I'm implementing a sword fight, like a shield, sword and board mechanics, I'm like, yes, that is inherently combat. I'm no closer to making this a better game because you put combat on there. But if you say like impactful, loud, and uh, like insert better idea here. If you put like some real heat on what that combat means, you can then be like, oh, okay, well, if I'm implementing this shield bash, it should destroy the shield every time I do it because we want combat to be really purposeful and deliberate and risky maneuver, which is different from I want a fun hack and slash time. That's helpful. Multiple viewers read them and come to the same conclusion. So if three people go away, if we go, what does collaborate and thrive mean to you? And Gavin says, oh, well, that means to me that I'm gonna grief all my players that are in the same server as me. I'm like, I think we messed up with the pillars. I'm not sure that's not our intent. Doesn't mean it's wrong. You shouldn't go to your team and go, no, you're wrong. That's not what the pillar means. Be like, okay, how can we get to a better understanding? Everybody should just say the same thing. It shouldn't need you to have to explain it. You got to revise them at key milestones. They're meant to inspire the team. They're meant to keep the team focused, but it's not something that you need to just be like, well, man, I really wish we could make the jetpack different, but we've said in our pillars that we're not going to support that feature in that way. You should, at key moments of your project, go back and say, "Oh, is this working for us? We keep coming up against collaborate and thrive, and we keep coming up against it, and players actually are having a really fun time griefing each other in this game." And it's creating these really exciting moments. Okay, let's analyze this. Maybe it's not right for our game. Maybe we want something different here. So don't be afraid to do that. This is a balance. You can't be doing it every week, but you should at key points if you're working towards a vertical slice, if you're working towards first playable, certain key milestones, you should try as much as you can to stay the course so that everybody's working towards the same thing. And then very deliberately change it. If you very deliberately want to change something, you just need to all kind of be on the same page. It's like, oh, we are changing this. This is no longer true. It is now this instead. And it also, for as much as game pillars are really useful in what you are doing, they're also incredibly useful to define what you're not going to do. And it's just a weight off your shoulders as a game developer because we've all felt like, oh man, I've got to go. If I'm making an action adventure, like an exploration game, man, Uncharted do this thing, and Last of Us does. Oh man, okay, we're gonna have to make a crafting system. Oh, okay, we're gonna have to have stealth sections. Okay, we're gonna have to have that. You can snowball really quickly. Having some robust pillars that define what you are doing also gives you permission to be like, well, crafting's not part of our game. Like our game's supposed to be really fast paced, high octane action. Crafting is completely against that, so we're not doing crafting. Even though crafting might work in a different game, or maybe there's some way it could work, it just absolves you of that responsibility to try and fit everything in. And when you get playtest feedback too, it's like, I wish there was crafting in this game. You can go, cool, awesome. That's not the game that we're trying to make. You don't need to feel like, oh man, loads of people wanted crafting. You can analyze then what that was getting at. And I've got sections on playtesting later. But I found them just really helpful in just absolving you of the responsibility or the feeling of, we've got to do everything and this game has to be my magnum opus and do all the things. It's like, no, you can make a silly little platformer. That's great. That's awesome. Do what you set out to achieve. Don't feel like it needs to be everything. That's pillars. I got more other game dev frameworks, but I want to take this time to be like, any questions about game pillars? Yeah. Yes. User story would be like, uh, how about this? Give me an example of a feature in a game that you really like, or something you like doing in a game. I'd be able to throw things. Okay. Like throw rocks, grenades, axes, whatever. Okay. Say we're making like a Conan game. You're throwing an axe at someone. Like we're working together on a team. I'm like, that sounds amazing. I want to be able to throw axes at people too. Okay, let's make a user story for it to make sure we're on the same page and make sure that when we are implementing the feature, we can play test against it and know, okay, we've achieved that thing. So user story for something like this would be, as a player, I want to quickly and accurately throw an axe from my inventory so that I can one-shot enemies and feel powerful. That gives us a very clear direction through animation. It's now the animator on the team knows it's like, this VFX artist knows there's this huge blood splatter when you throw it against somebody's face. Because we put about inventory, we know the engineer has to like, okay, I got to manage the inventory system. There needs to be a limit to these. And we know that it's a power fantasy. It's not about, which would be very different from an also valid user story might be, I want to throw axes as a last ditch effort for when my axe is about to run out of durability. I can then throw it to do a last ditch effort of damage as I'm running away. Now it's very different implementation. Now it's a very different vibe. Yeah.
How do you go about resolving when you have maybe two pillars that are, I wouldn't say nearly mutually exclusive, but if I think, for example, about I want my character to move really fast. Maybe part of it could be that we want this game to be really fast paced.
Hmm.
But then we add in, for example, and we also have to worry about some sort of inventory management. I want people to really think about, the use of that jetpack. So I want a fast jetpack, but it's going to have very small fuel.
Mm.
To me, that seems like I'm going to have to give up one of the two. So how do you go about resolving those types of situations?
Yeah, I think you don't necessarily need to change the pillars if you're very deliberate about uh, like this. Some features don't need to support a pillar. In fact, if you make everything support everything, that's how you get a bit of a soup and you don't really.
Conversely, I can think of like Sonic, where it's like moves super fast, and then everything in Sonic is to slow your character.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And there's parts where that works, there's parts where that doesn't work. Again, to use your example in Sonic, that works really well if you've just come out of a half pipe and you're then static and stationary and you're going into a platforming section.
Yeah.
Doesn't work well at all if you're sprinting along a 2D plane and there's an enemy in front of you and you just hit the enemy and you're like, oh, I was going really fast, I was enjoying doing that. So I would, if we have two diametrically opposed features like that, I would be deliberate in where you deploy them to the player and make sure the player understand they're in a different state. They're doing something different. If they decide to, I'm going to go back to base and craft, that's maybe where crafting does fit in to a high octane action, fast moving, speed running game because you're not asking the player to do the same thing at the same time. You're going like, cool, break. Now here's this part of the game.
Thank you.
Yeah. Tied into that too is, and I talk about this later, is about meeting players' expectations of the thing that they're doing. And this always comes up when a player's expectation is not met. And you might have a very smart design on paper for like what makes sense because of these reasons, but if I'm in a flow state, if I'm just playing the game, I expect certain things to happen. And if my expectations are not met, or you haven't warmed me up to the idea that maybe your expectations aren't going to be met, maybe you should be on edge for something that's going to happen, I will blame the game. I'll be like, stupid game. Sucks. Anything else?
Would you find this sort of game pillars idea useful for like smaller game jam style things, or is it more for like more large scope style games?
I definitely find it useful for small things as well, because if you figure out how to do this, let me know. Every single game jam I'm a part of, I always overscope it no matter how hard I try. Every single time I'm like, we need to make it smaller, it needs to be concise, this. I want to grab opportunities as they arise and be like, oh, but we're playtesting. It would be really great if we had power ups in the game as well. It'd be really great if we had this and this. And having pillars, even in a game jam game, they don't need to be as wordsmithed and as pithy, and I
Yeah,
don't spend as long on them, but it at least puts you all laser focused on one thing, especially if you're doing a game jam where it's like, cool, let's all go to our desks and work and do
yeah.
stuff. It then means that you're all then doing the same thing and you don't come back 5 hours later to your artist to be like, oh, I thought we were making a side scroller.
I thought this was supposed to look like Bloodborne, not
Yeah,
Mario.
exactly. Or if they know that it's going to be fast paced and moving quickly, then they make the assets to spec that will look good under those
Yeah,
situations. Oh, yeah.
rather than doing 300 in betweens, it's gonna go quick.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. And iteration's always part of game dev too, but like if you can do even a little bit to kind of get everybody aligned, and it also gets the ego out of the room too. Like something I'm always really passionate about on teams I work with is, there's no one person who is like, well, my idea is better. Like you have to be able to walk your idea back to the game pillar. And then we can be having a great conversation around like, I think Jetpack should be like this. No, I think it is. And then we go, okay, pause. Let's look at the pillars. Let's let them decide what's good for the game. And most of the time we'll come to an agreement and be, oh, okay, I guess my way of I'm excited about my version, but you're right. It doesn't support the one of the pillars we said was slow paced, methodical. I just really want to go fast. You're like, I hear you. That would be really good, but we established our pillars were this, and we just need to keep going for this milestone. But let's do it for this milestone for this week, or for a day if you're doing a daily game jam. And then you're like, let's reassess at the end of the day. If it's not working out, we'll change it. And then we purposefully change direction and do something else.
fair.
Cool. I have more things. Gameplay loops. I'm going to take a sip of water first, though, because I'm talking a lot. Gameplay loops are awesome. This is like what the player's experience is going to be like going through the game. They are really useful for assuring alignment. They're really useful for supporting team culture and the kind of experience you want to make. And a lot of the same things that pillars are useful for. What the heck's a gameplay loop? You'll hear this term being thrown out a lot. And if you Google gameplay loop, game dev, you'll see spider diagrams and ridiculous things. There's lots of different effective strategies. I like to do a very simple pared down one so that it's easy to understand, and it's also easy to use as a razor to be like, well, that doesn't belong in the loop, let's not do it. So the gameplay loop's a series of major actions that you take through a gameplay experience. The core loop's foundational, is where the player will spend most of their time. You'll often hear it referred to as moment-to-moment gameplay. If somebody says, what do you do in this game? Then you should then respond with the gameplay loop. So it's about exploring and mining and crafting. I wonder what game this could be. And usually you establish this in the prototyping phase. When you have that click moment where you're like, it's a game, that's when you've established your gameplay loop and you can kind of keep going and keep playing and it feeds into itself. So a useful structure that I've used for gameplay loops, which has been really effective, is to set up into 3 different discrete beats. You have your objective, which is the thing that the player decides to do. It's not necessarily in-game that I've given you a pop-up objective. It's just the player deciding, I'm going to try and clear this room stealth. That's my objective. The challenge is the things that the player needs to overcome to achieve that. And the reward is then what they get for doing it. And the reward could be that they just get to do it again, or it could be the discovery of a new objective. That's why you see the really important part of this loop that sometimes be pretty challenging is how does the reward fit back into the objective? How does it give you more information about a new objective? How does it give you a new tool to set a different objective for yourself? And that's where you find that you've been playing a game for 5 hours straight because you're just stuck in this loop of like, I did the thing. Oh, but now I now got this new tool. Now I got a hang glider. Now I can go to that place that I wanted to go to. Okay, cool. I'll do that. Oh, but now the challenge is that I need to like be able to have enough stamina to use this hang glider. Okay, great. And it keeps you really engaged and keeps going around. Yeah, that was a brief one, and we'll go into more detail into each one. Stop me if any time because some of these can get a bit heady. So the objective is, yeah, what are you trying to accomplish in order to progress? It could just be information gathering. It could be a decision you make. Some examples of an objective. The player decides which sector in space to travel based on their readings on the star map. The player explores their surroundings and they look for points of interest. Breath of the Wild, you just get up onto a hill and you just look around. That's your objective. The player studies enemy patrols. If I'm trying to stealth take down this room, I just study where the patrols are going, and then I make a plan of attack and I equip certain weapons. I'm like, okay, I think I'm ready. It's the what players are trying to do. And the challenge, as like we talked about, is what you need to overcome in order to complete that objective. It's often the most demanding section of the loop where a lot of your gameplay will happen. This is the player steers their spaceship through an asteroid belt. You're physically steering this ship, weaving in and out. It's the player pushing a physics block to open up a path. It's you fighting enemy AI in a shootout. This is the how you're accomplishing that that task. And the reward is what you receive after you complete the objective. It can literally be like you got gold, you got a sword, you got more enemy intel, or it could just be avoiding a consequence. So stealthing through a room, your reward is you did not set off the alarm. That's a good enough reward as well, and it feeds back into the objective of now I can survey my environment again more freely because I'm not running away from enemies and I'm still in stealth mode. Some examples: player lands on a new planet, they log it in their journal, they add a fast travel point. That's the reward. they can then make a new objective based on that to be like, I can now go back and forth between these two things. I can now trade way easier between these two spaceports. It can be you find a treasure chest with a sword in it. I can now hit things more cool. I can now go into that skeleton cave in Dark Souls that busts my butt every time. Awesome. Or it can be avoiding combat altogether. It means you're in better shape for the next objective. Roguelikes do this a lot where if I get through a level in Splunky and didn't take a hit, I'm now like, awesome. Now I could probably go for the secret part. Now I can probably push out further because I've saved all my bombs, I've saved my equipment, I have a new objective available to me now. They're in every single game. It'll help to be on the lookout for them. And again, it's very tempting to try and create more sections, but every game boils down to these three: rock, paper, scissors. You plan what you're going to, you look somebody else in the eye, and you're like, I think they're going to throw scissors, I'm going to throw rock. You then do it, and you resolve, and then you can make another objective based on that, being like, okay, they've done scissors twice in a row. Should I change? Is that the thing they want me to do? Tetris, analyze a piece, maneuver it, then the wall changes its layout and now have a different objective. The state of the game has changed. Super Mario, you analyze the screen, you look at the obstacles, you then use your dexterity over the controller to jump around, get over them, and you progress. You get a new set of information on the screen as it scrolls over, and you get to analyze that again, make another objective. Pokemon, your objectives get stronger. You can do that by battling monsters, and your reward is you capture them, you get experience, which gives you another objective. Now I got a Pokemon that's super effective against this gym leader. I can now go and take on that gym leader. Oh, I need to level them up. They're not strong enough. I should go battle them again. And it keeps you engaged in that loop. This gets fun. That's not the only part of a game. Like, that's the core game loop, but then you have nested game loops. So inside of Explore in Minecraft, it's not just I'm exploring, it's I'm surveying my environment, looking around. I make a target of I'm going to go to there, and then I navigate the environment there, and I jump up blocks and I avoid enemies, whatever. And then I come back out of that loop, and I can either keep doing that, or I could go into start mining, I start crafting. Each of these sub loops also has their own objective, challenge, reward. And you'll probably get nested into that as well, the more refined your game becomes. If you want to add features, if you're like, exploring is a little bit boring in this game, you can then add a nested loop to exploring that would support, more gameplay there. You can have interlinked game loops. So you can have something where so most of the time you can always explicitly exit a loop. Like if at any point that I'm exploring, I can stop and start crafting something. It doesn't mean I have to mine and then I have, before I go to craft something, it's kind of implied that you can just exit a loop wherever. But this helps you visualize, okay, if I start mining, I can exit this loop if I identify a threat. And part of me uh, resolving that threat, my objective is now to explore and to try and find ways around this enemy instead of going into combat. Metagame is also a way you can analyze your loops. So this is like knowledge of the game that the player has, that like just as a person sitting on the other end of the screen. It's not necessarily information the game has given you, but it's strategies you've developed, it's knowledge that you've gained, how to min-max your gear, how to use knowledge from a previous session in a roguelike run. Um, or if you really don't like certain sections of the game, how to minimize sections of that gameplay loop entirely. If I'm really bad at combat, I'm always going to identify a threat and then bow out of this loop because I don't want to do combat and go straight back to exploring. Yes.
Minecraft people will like, oh, you got to go to minus 200 first and then do strip mine to get the diamonds because that's kind of where they start spawning and people just sort of have that knowledge set.
Yeah, exactly. So you don't need to stay in the exploration loop. You can go straight to the, I'm going to go there because I know what I need.
Nice.
Yeah, this lets you put your, I use this phrase a lot, put your finger on the scale of what you want to actually do in the game rather than just naturally going through these loops. It lets you go, no, I'm going to do this and I'm going to skip out this part of the loop. I don't need to go into my equipment screen and put on my armor because I know I can run past these creepers. It's fine. It's not a problem. Um, don't do this. Try not to do this. I do this all the time. If you Google gameplay loops, you'll see a lot of things like this. I don't know what any of these mean. They're just things you can do in the game. It's not particularly helpful, especially the Mario one. It's like you run along the map and then you collect power ups. You can avoid or kill any. So, does that mean that I can't do it from over here? Does that mean that it's just really, I don't know what this is. This isn't useful. This is a kind of after the fact, like somebody analyzing the game and going, here's all the things you can do in the game, and here's where they kind of connect, but not really. Same with Fortnite, same with Pokemon. Like, I just don't know what these are. And I don't know how they would be useful to you as a dev team. It's kind of documentation for documentation's sake. That's why if you look at this, it's really clear. Like, it'll force you to make simpler decisions and to not add bolt things onto the loop. We should add this feature. Then we'll be like, oh, darn, that doesn't exist within this loop. It doesn't support the next phase, so we probably shouldn't do it. Whereas if you do something like this, it always lets you go, oh, let's add this thing here, and let's connect it over here as well, and then this and this, and you just end up with a mess, and it's now, that's how your game feels unfocused, and it doesn't feel like things are gelling and people get bored. This, I can't, this is like one of the first things that pops up when you Google gameplay loops on Google Images. I don't know what that is. And it also, but I've done this, to be fair. Like everybody does this. If you are really attached to something, if you're really attached to a certain feature or a certain part of your game, you will bend over backwards to add complexity to try and keep it in. You'll be like, no, this is good, and we're going to change all the level design to make sure that this is still going to work, and then we're going to add this other mechanic, and add this other thing to support it, and it just that's where you I call it you get quite sweaty. Like it's just trying really hard to achieve something that you probably shouldn't be doing. And so if you ever start to do this, just recognize it. This will happen. Take a step back and go, how can we simplify this? We need to go back to our core loops. We need to only make features that support the core of our game. The complexity will come. You don't need to design complexity like this on paper. It's not going to serve you. It's not going to do anything for you.
I like how full of buzzwords that one is with meta rent and NFT shelf. I'm like, great.
Yeah. Do you want a meta event and an NFT? Was it Shove?
Yeah,
Like,
no, I'm
do
good.
you want one of those in your game? I don't. Best practices, or at least, again, lots of different ways to do it. Here's what I found useful for me. Start with your core gameplay loop. If that's not solid, everything else is going to suffer for it, or you will struggle. You might get lucky. Lots of game developers get lucky, and that's amazing. That's not advice that I can give anybody, is like just try and get it right first time. That'll be great. Sometimes it happens, it'll be awesome. Not every game developer goes through an exercise like this, but a common theme in everything that I'll talk to you about today is like, how do you increase your luck? How do you increase your chance of getting it right? How do you get your iteration speed up so that you're testing against something? You're not just like, I think it was fun. You're like, okay, does it support the core loop? And you'll get better at it as you continue developing as game devs, as you make more games. Your hip fire accuracy will just get better. Yeah, your core loop's where you spend most of the time. You know, a flawed core loop can shore up. You can shore it up with extrinsic rewards, which is like literally like, here's some gold. Go do the thing that as a game developer I want you to do, and that works for a while. But then we've all played games where it's just like, am I just doing this because I'm getting a whole bunch of like extra armor or extra gold in the game? I don't really need this. Or XP, like, Destiny does this, World of Warcraft does this. It's just like, I'm just getting points. I don't really want to be doing this. And that's where most people stop playing a game, when they realize, what am I doing? I'm just doing it for the sake of doing it. So extrinsic rewards will only get you so far. Intrinsic rewards are ones that are like, as a player, I want to do this. Like it is fun. It is enjoyable to me. I want to set this challenge and I want to overcome it. Yeah, see gotcha games, clickers, freemium titles, they get you really like, yeah, hooks into you really quickly because our brains are dumb and they really like numbers going up and they really like getting rewarded with stuff. But that goes away pretty quickly. Keep it simple, quote unquote, elegant design. It comes from a well thought out, robust loop. We've all played games where we're like, oh, it's so simple and it just connects with each other so well. That's because they've spent time through luck or through purposeful design. They have a really elegant loop that everything feeds into itself and it all feels part of the same experience. It's really tempting to add complexity. You'll do it. Just notice you're doing it. And if you start doing it too much, just start bringing it back. This helps you again cut stuff. It helps you to not be emotionally attached to parts of your game and just look at it scientifically and go, cool, this idea is a good idea. It doesn't fit with our loop. Let's put it over there. Maybe it will in the future. Maybe in a month's time, we'll be making the game and it will be a good idea again and we'll bring it back. Really endeavor to stick to the objective challenge reward framework. It's really hard when you start doing it. I spent years like kind of questioning it a little bit. Like I was working with um, my boss at Ubisoft, and he's a really smart dude. He kind of started pitching this to us, and I was like, doesn't make sense. It's too simple. Not everything needs an objective. Sometimes you do it for the joy of doing it. And he's like, that's the objective. And I'm like, you can't say that that's just the objective is just having fun. And it's like, that is the objective is having fun. And then you make a challenge for yourself to go have fun. I was like, it doesn't make sense too much. But after you start getting into the swing of things, it really does help. And again, it just helps to the part that it helps the most with is to do this reward section, making sure that's just not a dead end. Because a lot of games do this where you're like, you did it, you beat the level, good job. On to the next level. It's like, well, how does it loop back into my objective could be beat the next level, but it's like, I wish you gave me something more. Or you as a developer will be like, there's so much more to explore in this big open world I've created. But if you don't connect the reward back to the objective really strongly, give the player something they can do. It doesn't need to be an item, but it could be like you end this mission on a grand vista where you see a temple over in the distance. That's a that's how you're connecting it back to the objective. That's really hard, but that's the most important part. Where was I? Um, yeah, enjoy loops for solid first before you focus on the metagame. I've done this. I've seen a lot of teams do this, where especially if they're making a multiplayer game, they focus on the meta, they focus on making things balanced, and they focus on making things fair. Don't worry about it. It'll figure itself out. You'll play test. Don't worry about it. Um, this again leads to added complexity before you've even established your core loop. I've seen teams do, and I've done this where we've gone away and made like a looter, like a hero shooter game. And you start going like, okay, so it needs to work like this does in Overwatch, and therefore we need these buffs and these cooldowns and these things. It's like, whoa, you don't have the basis of a game yet. You're already going way too far in terms of complexity. You're going to make a rod for your own back. It's going to be really difficult to do things later on. And if your game isn't clicking or if players don't know what to do, go back to your gameplay loops. Something's not connecting. You probably need to make it 10 times more obvious than you think it does. Like if the player picks up a key in a dungeon, they're like, neat. They'll walk away and you're like, no, in the next, if you just went 3 rooms further, you'll find the key that thing fits. Make it a red key, make the door red, make a blood trail from the thing to like make it super obvious. Make sure that connects first. Then you can start pulling back on being obvious until players miss it, and then you bring it back. You find that sweet spot, but don't start from a place of obscurity or start from a place of like letting the player do too much. Myself included. You get smooth brain, right? You're playing a video game. You just want to do the thing, and sometimes giving the player exactly what they expect, exactly what they want, it's totally fine. You don't need to innovate everywhere. Some really good resources for gameplay loops. I mentioned that my old boss at Ubisoft kind of started working with this framework. His name's Richard Carrillo. He's a great dude. There's a lot of game design books out there. This book is pretty concise. It's like 100 pages and it's just really to the point. I've definitely read a load of textbooks that kind of like, wow, this works really well. And I'm sure this works great if you have millions and millions of dollars and unlimited time and can do everything yourself. This book has some really clear and concise things like, if this is happening in your game, try this. If you're struggling with this thing, go back to this framework and try doing this. It also really grounds you, if you're interested in being a game designer or working design, on the responsibilities of a game designer. That it's not just I think of ideas for the game. It's actually you have a core responsibility to communicate out to your team, to rally your team, to also like um, be a champion for their work as well. In the next talk I've got, if anybody sticks around for that, I'll go into like again some pitfalls of here's what I thought being a designer was, and here's how it actually works being in the industry or being as part of it, being part of a team, and some of it's very different. Gameplay loops are strongly tied to player motivation. I've used the theory of the self-determination theory is a really good lens, which talks about motivation is a component of three things. It's a component of do players have autonomy? Do they have competence? Do they feel like they have relatedness? Autonomy being like, can you do the thing? Can you press the button to jump over this fence? Yes, I can. Players care about that the most first. Can I do it? Then they care about their competence. How well can I jump over that fence? Can I do it while I'm sprinting? Can I not waste any time? Can I, yeah, whatever. Like, how well can I do it? And then relatedness is how the player relates to the game world. How do they feel connected to what they're doing? Do they understand like the importance of it? So it could be like, why am I jumping over this fence? I'm trying to run away from an enemy, or I'm trying to deliver something and I care about this NPC because they're part of the story and I want to do this. I feel related to the game. And all of that ties into motivation. So if you ever feel like players aren't motivated to do the thing that you want them to do in your game, you can look at these three things and you might be over leverage on one. You might be like, well, the player really needs to do this because they're a really important person in the story. And it's like, yeah, but if your player doesn't care about relatedness for their motivation, you might need to test them further, like encourage them more on autonomy and competence. So again, lots of just good rules of thumb. Nothing is a solve all for everything. Any questions about gameplay loops? Yeah.
This question is super complicated. Like, how do you keep it simple? Because I've tried multiple times, and probably with teams, actually, we
Yeah.
have tried to keep the game loops simple.
Yeah.
Like, when would you like, how would you like divide it into, small loops that wouldn't end up like the bad examples that you gave us, for example?
Yeah. That's a good question. DB, so you're saying your question is how do you keep things simple and not have things balloon? Are you talking about like a team dynamics kind of thing, or are you talking about like just as you develop the game, it just gets bigger and bigger? Yeah. Got it. I think I'm following you. Yeah. Let me go back to just the main thing. The short answer is it's really hard. It's really hard for people that have been doing this for like decades. It's really challenging, especially it gets more challenging for some people, myself included sometimes, because you think you're like, oh, but I can cheat. I've been doing this for a while, so I can kind of make it a little bit more complicated. It's always a bad idea. However simple you think your design is or your game is, make it a tenth as simple as that. Like a game will always balloon in complexity and scope. I've never seen a game get smaller as from its like initial design. I've never seen for its initial pitch be like, you know what, we actually don't need all of these things and we're going to do a smaller version instead. It always grows. And you're in a great position if you start off really small and then you're like, this is a fun small platformer that we can make in a few months and it'll work. It's really easy to then add complexity in and add like, the nested loops on top. If you've got a strong foundation like this becomes really easy and it feels natural and you'll feel like, oh, well, this is just a no-brainer. This slots in here, this slots in here. But if this isn't nailed down and like if you just take this for like what do we have an example of? Minecraft. So like exploring, mining and crafting, that sounds like a really basic game that I'm probably not going to play for a while. I'm gonna walk around, mine some stuff, craft some stuff, walk around, mine some craft some stuff. And early days Minecraft was that, right? It's a huge sandbox, not a lot to do past then. Phenomenal sandbox. But if you're not there for that, then you're like, what's my motivation? Why am I here? But then it's really easy for them to be like, now you got enemies. Now you've got additional quests. Now you've got additional POIs because their core loop was just so strong, they could add a whole bunch of stuff. So in terms of how to keep it simple, just it's really tough. The best way I found is looking at other competitive games. If you're making a certain game, it's always going to be competitive. Like there's always going to be another game out there that's similar in some way to your game, unless you're you know, completely trailblazing. I would look at their really core fundamental loop and go, well, it's actually quite simple for them. They do it really simply. We don't need to innovate yet. We will find out what the innovation is as we go. Let's make it as simple as possible. Start playing. We will find the fun as we develop the game. You don't need to challenge yourself, especially on paper, to make it like if you ever find yourself doing anything innovative on paper before you've robustly play tested it, that's like, we should stop. This is too complicated. Let's just get the core of a platformer done now, or the core of a shooter, or whatever you're making. Everything else will come from it. And that's where, again, going back to the other stuff of like game pillars and user stories, if you have, say, a platform already set up and you want to innovate in a certain way, you can then shoot a shot and go, okay, we want to innovate here, add this new mechanic. Let's create a user story for it so we know when it's being successful. Then you can playtest it, prototype it, and you can be playtesting and go, well, does it meet this user story? Does it do this thing? No, it doesn't. Okay, I guess it's not working. Okay, cool, great, let's move on. And you don't waste your time like chasing something forever. Sorry, did that answer your question? Does that help? As a yes. This is really tough. I wish I could tell you do these three simple things, but it's like one of the hardest things to do in game development is keeping it simple.
How do you feel about the idea of like, so you showed that Minecraft had like the exploration one and then
Yeah.
the combat one. How do you feel about the idea of like a gameplay loop that's literally like three things,
Mhm.
like three master things, almost like sections of your game that then break down into their own individual gameplay loops?
Yes, that happens. Exactly that.
Yes.
So this is
So
an example of like two core loops that are both very important to Minecraft, and then insert a third one here. Like,
I mean,
and then those loops all go around like this. But you can, if you make each one of those really concise, because here I can stay in the combat loop forever
yeah,
if I want to. I don't need to rely on external stimulus to do it. That's what makes a game hooky and like gets you like playing for hours and hours on end. And then when I decide to leave and go to a different loop, I can then do that. So yeah,
and these
that was
gameplay loops are you think that they're like a even more than probably like the pillars, probably like for a game jam, like get those gameplay loops are locked in, or
yeah. I think so. For a game jam,
yeah,
you're just doing you're just
just
doing this.
yeah, okay,
You are like you're not going and putting down on paper these nested loops, these other diagrams. You're not doing that. But what I would establish is this for your game jam game, and then stick to that. And
yeah.
again, it'll help you keep it simple. It'll help you keep it like flowing. Any game jam game that you're going to make on a weekend or a week or a month, whatever, it's going to be a very small game. You should take brave steps and try and do new, interesting things. I would do that on top of a foundation of a solid gameplay loop. And this doesn't need to be world changing. This can be a platformer where you explore, jump on enemies, and get points. And giving points lets you, get to the next level and jump on more enemies, do whatever. And once you've got that core gameplay loop, you can then have fun. That's then the most fun part of game development is when you've got the core gameplay loop, it's working. Now everything else is just gravy. Now you can start experimenting with, let's do this power up. That didn't work, throw it away. You don't then have that problem of like, this game's not working. How do we, got to get in the guts and rip everything out. You're like, it's working. Game, the core loop is done. How do we make it even better? Yes.
emphasized a couple times is the role of teamwork in working as a designer, like making sure the pillars are relevant to every section of the team, or how a designer needs to be able to like rally the rest of the team and champion their work. Do you have any advice on how to be a better team player?
Be a better. So the question is, like, designer needs to do a lot and they need to communicate and work with the team a lot. How to get better at that and be a good team player? Is it? Are you saying for designers, for people working for designers, everybody? Sorry, I gave you like three questions in one. I just threw them at you. Uh, do you want to know specifically like what you can do as a designer or like what you can do as a team member? Cool. I don't know why I asked for clarification because it's both. Um, how can you be? I think checking your ego at the door is so important. It's again really hard. I wish I could give you a 10-step program to do it. We all get really attached to our games. We all get really everybody who says like I'm not precious about their ideas, they're a liar. Everybody's precious about their ideas. They just deal with it better. Like I had last week, some like my boss Ryan Clark goes, oh, I don't think that's gonna work. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. And I leave the room. I'm like, oh, God damn it! I really wanted that thing to work. I thought it was great. Or I'm like, oh, I think it would be good actually. The best thing to do is to separate that from your understanding of why a decision was made. So it's again, get away from its, well, I think this and you think this, therefore, well, my opinion is more important. I'm the designer, we're going to do this. You instead make it about the pillars, make it about the gameplay loop, make it about you and the team versus the problem you're trying to solve. And just having that empathy and understanding, be like, look, I hear you. That idea is a good idea. That's really cool. I just don't like it, just doesn't fit with the gameplay loop. Like if you can, let's work on it together, let's workshop it. Maybe we can find a way that it fits within the gameplay loop. And as soon as you start talking about that, it's always you and the team versus the problems. You then get out of the situation where it's like opinions or it's, somebody feels like they're not being heard because they can always bring something up. It also, again, empowers the team to, like, if you think of something that works with these pillars, bring it up. Let us know. Like if you see an opportunity here, it's not just like, oh, I'm doing the art because I'm just the artist. It's like, no, I'm a team member, I'm a game developer. We could all, there's a reason why we're all here, like wanting to make video games, as opposed to also very great professions, very awesome, rather than being just a graphics designer, making logos, being a like um, back-end software engineer. Those are all fantastic. But making video games is a collaborative team effort, and you need to be involved in the thing that you're making, why you're making it, and good ideas come from everywhere. So never shut those out. Always be open, and yeah, you against the problem. It's tough though. It's really tough. We all get really attached to stuff. I do. Oh, I got a little bit more. These are some honorable mentions for frameworks. So you might have picked up about this from me. I'm really into kind of having a whole bunch of stuff in your toolkit as a designer as like a Swiss Army knife of like, oh, I should think about this. I should think about this. Like, you're not going to solve all of your problems with gameplay loops. You're not going to solve all your problems with pillars. But as you continue to make games, you'll get the feeling of like, this problem is coming from, okay, we haven't developed our pillars enough. And that's how you could try and solve it. Or if that doesn't work, you can then be like, okay, that didn't really help, but let's go to the game. Let's now check, the game loops. Let's see that those are working. So we talked about user stories. This is a more in-depth look at them. It's as a player, I want to do X so that I can do Y. It focuses on the end. It focuses on the end goal and the experience target rather than the feature itself. So a good example is, as a player, I can attack the boss at any time so that I can push my luck and look for opportunities. So in there, you've got the why. It's not just like because I want to. It's like so that I can have this kind of experience. And that leads you to the implementation of it. That leads you to, okay, now I press up to attack the boss whenever I like. And if I hit it during a certain frame, I will stun them. And now I get more of an exciting opportunity to push my luck and to get the boss, whittle the boss's health down a little bit. But if I push my luck too much, or if I get my timing wrong, I'm going to be punished. So just having a simple, again, keeping it really simple as a user story, you'll be tempted to make this really complicated. Keep it one short sentence. It really helps. Interrupt me at any time on these ones because I'm just going to go through a bunch quick because each one of these could be like an hour long thing. Player skills, these are really, really useful. If you ever feel like in your game things start to feel too similar or too samey, or it's like, oh, I'm just doing the same thing over and over again, or I'm not engaged enough, challenged enough, I would take a look at it from a player skills lens and go, what are we testing the player on? I found great success using these categories, but you can modify it a little bit depending on what your game is. So the first one is measurement and dexterity. This is literally like your ability as a human to manipulate the control sticks, to press buttons in a certain order, to like just your dexterity on the controller, knowing your way around a keyboard and shortcuts. Your timing. This is about understanding the timing of something, not necessarily reacting to it, but just understanding that something is happening and it has some sort of a cadence. So seeing a door opening and close and knowing when to like, okay, I should go now. Accuracy, it's if you're throwing an axe, if you're throwing a grenade, a tennis ball, it's knowing like, okay, it's going to follow this kind of trajectory or bullet drop off in a PvP game. You've got your reflex. It's just your ability to do something fast. It's you see something in the corner of your eye and you turn to face it, or you block something really fast. It's very simple action. It's just like press B. But how quickly can you do it? How quickly can you recognize that's the situation? You need to press B and then do it. Strategy is your ability to use your, like, again, your metagame knowledge of how the game's being put together and like do an action. So you know, like, I'm going up against fire enemies, therefore I should equip my ice equipment and attacks. I should add fire resistance to my defense. Or deploying a decoy to distract enemies. You then know that's going to bait them out and you can take advantage of that position. This is sometimes important, sometimes not, depending on your game, but communication. So coordinating with other players, your ability to concisely get across information to go enemy at B, go like rush B, and then everybody to action on that and then go and do it. Every mechanic is a combination of these, but if you find your game feeling too similar, you might go through this and go, okay, actually like all of our mechanics mainly leverage timing and reflex. There's not really any accuracy in there. We don't do that in our game. There's not really any measurement and dexterity. We don't challenge the player to grind on a rail and have to balance with the control stick. Okay, maybe let's modify this feature a little bit and turn it into that. If we're making a new boss fight and we'll challenge the player in a different way, we go, okay, we haven't really challenged their strategy. We've just challenged their reflexes so far. This is super useful. We've used it in every game at BYG for as long as I've been there, and it's always just proven really useful. Just in the brainstorming stage of like, if you're planning out 3 boss fights, you make sure, okay, one's about timing, one's about accuracy, and one's about strategy. And you purposefully don't do the other things. Like if a boss is about strategy, you make it so that the attack windows are very large. You make it so that you don't have to do any complicated inputs on the controller. You just make it about the strategy. And if you get that strategy right, if the boss is cycling between red, blue, and green, and you use the red, blue, green weapons at the right time, great, you did it. But those windows can be large. Yeah, you make purposeful decisions to not do the other things. Remembering your audience is super important. Again, another great lens for like if something's not working or if you feel like the game's too much. You remember your audience, remember why you're making this game, who your target is. There's a great resource. Quadric Foundry is awesome for this. They have developed all of these like different player types and player archetypes. The players are interested in a few things like action or social engagement, mastery, achievement, immersion, creativity. and they have the whole 100-page PDF where they go into really detailed on this, and they say like, cool, here's the acrobat player archetype. The acrobat player archetype cares a lot about mastery, and they care a lot about action, but they don't care at all about creativity, and they don't care at all about social stuff. And this can really help you if someone's like, I wish there was multiplayer in the game. I wish there was a way to chat with other players. You can go, I hear you, that would be really cool. Our game is serving this target player, this audience. Or you can say, well, you can analyze existing games. So we're making a rhythm game right now at BYG, and a lot of rhythm game players really value creativity. They want to mod their own tracks. So we know we need to support that. We need to meet their expectations. They don't necessarily value immersion. That's not something that they're here for. They're here to be like, give me the hardest track. I want to play. I want to master it. They're here for mastery. So that tells us, okay, cool. We don't need to really labor why you're here in this world, what you're doing, why like DDR doesn't start up and say, okay, you need to press these buttons for these reasons because you're in a spaceship, and it doesn't matter. They're just like, yep, doesn't matter. You're in an arcade situation. Do this thing. That's it. That's all I got. Thank you. This is my Discord. Hit me up. And yeah, I've got more time. If anybody wants any more questions, I got another talk later that's about like, here's experiences of what it's like being in the games industry. Here's a bunch of like things that people look for in portfolios. Here's a way to like, develop your skills as a game developer, not just a designer.
Oh yeah.
So if you're around for that,
I mean, with your extra time, we want to try doing like taking our game jam idea and doing like an exercise with it. That'd be fun.
that'd be great.
Yeah. Okay. Sick. Let's do that. Y'all want to do that? You want to work through some of these game design principles in practice? Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Okay, sweet. Let's do that. Sweet. Let me switch the perspective of this. I think whiteboard makes sense.
I'll take it back to real.
Okay. Just a whiteboard marker, I imagine. Yeah. Okay. You know what? Why don't we do food first because it got here in time?
Great.
And we can do that after.
I love that. I'm
Yeah.
so glad you said that because I was like, I could really use some sugar.
Perfect timing. Food's here. We'll deal with this after. We'll be back in a bit stream. We'll start early. So expect us a little bit before. Oh god, it's what, 12, 15. Let's say 1:30, and then we'll do that little practice and then go into the actual